Hey, and welcome back to Step Into the Story and today's featured author segment. I'm Donna Jones-Allward. I'm here with my bestie and co-host, Barbara Tanner Wallace, and we're super pleased to welcome our special guest today, one of the founders of Step Into the Story and historical fiction superstar, Madeline Martin.
Yay.
Hello, thank you for having me. And I like that snazzy new intro you guys have. I was like,
that's Barb, and we always kind of do a little bop to it.
Yeah, I like it's very boppable. Yeah.
So we have a bunch of things that we want to talk about today, but we're going to start with your latest book because we both just finished it. Like we made sure we read it like close to our day.
Thank you.
And so it's the time.
Just for a brief aside, I tried to get it through my library when it first came out, and it was like that week they had 75 holds on it.
Oh wow, that's so awesome! Well, thank
hugely
you.
Popular, so that's got to bode well. That's dying for that book.
Thank you.
I got it off of NetGalley, which was great because you had some advanced copies there. Yes. And so it's called The Keeper of Hidden Books. I'm going to bring the cover up. There we go. It's so lovely. I love that little bit of light up in the top corner.
Thank you. I really wanted it to kind of symbolize like the warehouse.
Yeah, it's got that, but it's the green tone. Like it's just, I find it really striking.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so it's getting great reviews on Amazon and Goodreads, and BookBub listed it on their best historical fiction books for summer 2023. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what the book's about?
So The Keeper of Hidden Books was really inspired by Warsaw's public librarians during the Nazi occupation during World War II. Really, there was a huge amount of destruction as far as like books and looting when it came to art, books, a lot of things like cultural things. And so these public librarians really did risk their lives trying to save books where they could, have like a little hidden warehouse where they were able to keep the books that they were saving, and even keeping libraries open when the Nazis had closed them throughout Warsaw. And then even in the ghetto, there were also people who were trying to save books and pass them around with one another, including a secret children's library that had little shelves that would turn around from like a dollhouse, turning around into like a row of books. So really a lot of this is about that time period, and like a little secret book club also that emerges with one of the main characters.
So what led you to write about Warsaw? Because it's not exactly a common World War II topic. So
right.
Is this something you knew about from other research, or that you just kind of happened to
My heritage is actually Polish. And so I knew that I really wanted to write a World War II book set in Poland at some point, so I could just kind of delve a little bit more into my roots. Now, I will say that my family did come into America in the early or in the late 1800s. So, I mean, they weren't any part of this. But after I heard about the Polish resistance and how they were such a cohesive group, I mean, they really were the most organized resistance group of all of the resistance groups in Nazi-occupied Europe. And that really fascinated me, including the fact, like when the Nazis came into Poland, the Jews were not allowed to go to school anymore, and the Polish children were only allowed to go until 4th grade. And after that, they weren't allowed to go to school anymore. So the Polish resistance actually coordinated underground school systems, and underground means more clandestine than like literally underground. But by the end of the war, they had over 1 million school systems that were in place. Wow. That ranged from elementary school all the way through, and including graduate programs as well. So, and just, the amount of things they were able to do was just so incredibly fascinating. And so I thought, I really want to delve into this and really like look into this more. And so that's how I kind of got interested in writing about Warsaw. And while I was going through my research is when I uncovered these amazing journals that the Warsaw public librarians had written about their time during World War II and the efforts that they went through to try to save books and still be able to allow patrons to be able to use those books.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your Polish heritage, and that was one of the things we were wondering was, how emotional was it? I mean, was it very hard to write about time, even though your ancestors, you said, came over in the 1800s? This is your cultural ancestry and their ancestors, and the Nazis were just not just destroying it; they're trying to erase it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, when Hitler came into Poland, his original intention was to destroy, to kill off or put into camps 85% of the Polish population. He wanted to completely get rid of the Jewish population. He wanted to keep around 15% of the Polish people to use as slave labor and basically move people from Germany into Poland as like a second Germany. And so it was a very difficult book to research, also because I didn't realize how much death there really had been in Poland. I didn't really understand how incredibly dark it was during the Nazi occupation until I started delving into the research. And, you know, at that time, that's when I realized over 3 million Jews were put to death in Poland, almost 2 million Poles were put to death in Poland. And all of these numbers really are they're just estimates because it's so hard. Like so many, like I know at there's one particular prison, Pawiak prison, and they found a lot of ashes, and they basically were prisoners that had been burned. So it's impossible to tell how many people had come through there, how many of those people had been killed. So they actually weigh these ashes and estimate how much a body's worth of ashes would create. And then they did the math to kind of get an estimate. But I mean, it really is so difficult to say, but really, I mean, it's about, you know, almost 6 million people in just Poland alone. And Warsaw specifically had so much death and destruction as well. I'm selling this book really well, aren't I?
Exactly how hard
it was so hard.
Captures that.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, when my mom and I went to Poland for 2 weeks to do research for this, and you really couldn't even walk like 10 steps without finding another memorial to a number of people who had been killed during the Nazi occupation. And so, you know, it's really why, like, you know, I mentioned these atrocities that happen in the book because I feel like it would do a disservice to the people who suffered through it to completely pretend like it didn't happen and not talk about those atrocities. Mm-hmm. However, my genuine focus for this book really is the bravery of the men and women who fought back against the Nazi occupation. It's about the people who stood up and did the right thing and protected people who weren't able to protect themselves. It's about the beauty and the love of literature and how that shines through even in the darkest of times, and how there's always going to be humanity and decency and love even in times of such extreme persecution and hate. And so really that is what I hope is shining through more in the story than you know, the really desolate darkness of everything that transpired in those 5 years of the Nazi occupation.
Yeah. And you did it, like, I felt like it was really balanced in that, like, you didn't shy away from any of those things. And you certainly highlighted how bad it was. Like, I really got a sense of how bad it was. And yet the tone was always one of like hope and resilience, and so it didn't feel bleak, even though things were bleak. And so that was a really nice balance, because, you know, sometimes you can get really bogged down in that.
Right.
So that was I felt that was a really good balance. And like, Madeline, you're known for your in-depth research, and like, this book is no exception. And you said you went to Warsaw and, you know, with your mom. And I know you read dozens of research books. I've seen other podcasts and stuff with you where I'm just amazed by how deep you go into it. And
thank you.
One of the things we like to do is sort of pull back the curtain on the writing process just a little bit. So our question is this. So how do you, as a writer, take all of this information that you've collected, this, and it's like this giant cloud of information, and how do you decide what you're going to include and what you're going to omit, or what you'll change to suit your story? How do you make those decisions?
Well, it's really hard, as I know you ladies know. It's funny because I ended up with I had I had a little bit more than 15 spiral bound notebooks that were completely filled with handwritten notes between over 100 nonfiction books that I used in my 2 weeks in Warsaw. So, and it's funny because I had another interview. Somebody had asked me how much of that made it into the actual book. And when I sat back and thought about it, the answer is really only about maybe 30%, which is kind of mind blowing to think, to have so much research and not even use half of it. But really, I feel like that other 70% is what makes that story come alive so completely in my head.
Yeah.
So I think that as far as trying to figure out what to put into the book, first and foremost, it's going to be what's relevant to the character. There's so much other information that I had found that if I tried to incorporate it into the character or into her story, it would almost feel intrusive, into her story. You could tell that it was this puzzle piece that didn't really fit, and I just jammed it in there. So that would be one part of it. As far as trying to figure out what to put into the story, there really were so many relevant pieces. Like, for example, I really wanted her to be part of the Warsaw Uprising because of what an impact it really made on Warsaw at that time, and even still today, how much it's still really remembered and honored. And so that's why I actually have her starting off as a 17-year-old and ending the story, really when she's around 22, because that was around the average age of the really children who were fighting in the Warsaw Uprising, because they were the ones who were not taken prisoner or sent off to labor camps at the onset of the occupation. And then as far as what gets changed, for me personally, I really prefer to stick completely with history. So I didn't change anything about the timeline of what happened in Warsaw with this book. In fact, it's always funny because I read through all of my reviews. And I know early on with this book, somebody had written a review where they were where they said something along the lines of, this book was so completely contrived that none of this could possibly be real. And I'm like, well, actually, obviously, we don't respond.
Right.
We never respond. But in my head, I'm thinking this all came from firsthand accounts. So even though Zofia and Janina and all the rest of the characters really are fictional characters, they are essentially an amalgamation of all of these firsthand accounts that I have read. And I've really pulled all of that in and created their storylines based off of actual events from actual people that actually existed. And so, no, it's not contrived. These are very realistic scenarios. And sometimes the truth is, stranger than fiction, I guess. Yeah.
It's kind of scary to think that someone doesn't think it was as bad as,
I know. Well, and it's so funny too, just people's differences. I had these 2 3-star reviews that were posted back to back. And one of them was saying that it was just way too brutal to read. She couldn't read anymore. It was just too much. And another person gave me 3 stars because it wasn't nearly brutal enough to really showcase what happened in Warsaw, which really kind of just goes to prove you can't make anyone happy,
Right.
Everyone happy,
But I think if you'd gone more brutal, I think it would have taken away from the hope part. Because you're right. Donna said before, they never stopped expecting Poland to be free.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, which is probably why they eventually were free. I mean, it took another 30 years, but they did become free. They broke free of the Soviets too.
Right. Yeah. And that's some kind of background for people who may not know it. Before, so Poland was occupied by Russia for over 120 years until after the Great War with the Treaty of Versailles that was signed in 1918, which gave Poland their independence. They had just celebrated 20 years of that independence when the Nazis came in. And then after the Nazi occupation, they were under Soviet control until 1990. So, Zofia and her friends were born in this 20-year pocket of freedom. And that's why, with her character, why she's such a rebellious character, because these children were raised being told of the bravery and the ferocious fighters that had been part of their lineage leading up to that point, and how tenaciously they had constantly fought for generations for Poland's freedom, and they finally had this freedom. And so to have it taken away, that was another thing that was really difficult for me to grasp, because it's easy to think, oh, I know what it must be like to not have freedom. But really, when you take a step back and you think, having been born in a free world like Zofia was, like we have been, and think about what it would be like if somebody suddenly came in and you had no rights and you had no freedom. It's so large a thought that it's almost like thinking of something in 4D. And so really, I had to be able to put myself into Zofia's shoes and really imagine a world where somebody could walk into your house and arrest you or kill you, and you would never be seen again by anybody and nobody would even know. I mean, to have education completely stopped at 4th grade, to have all of your food taken away and carefully meted out. I mean, all of these things and so much more, really were what they were up against. So, yeah.
I was just curious. You had Zofia, it's a single POV point of view, which is these days kind of unusual. Most of the time you have the dual timeline or whatever. So this was very unusual that you stuck with the same woman. But I was actually very curious, what made you not do Janina's point of view? Because she's a very big role in this book. Excuse me.
Correct, yes. And I actually started off with it being a dual POV. So I have a habit of doing way too much research, and I will research for about 10 months and I realize, oh my God, my book is due in 2 months.
Research? No.
So I hit that point and I'm like, oh my gosh. So fortunately, I plot things out very, very thoroughly, which definitely helps because I have a roadmap. But I always keep researching even as I'm writing, all the way up to the copy edit phase, which I'm sure you guys know my editor loves. And so as I was researching, initially I was going to be, because I knew about all of the books that were really being saved and everything in the ghetto. And I had an idea of some of the stuff that was happening on the Polish side, but I had not yet found those journals by the Warsaw's public librarians. And I knew that I wanted this book to span from September 1939 all the way through May 1945. And for those of you who have read it, you know why exactly I wanted May 1945. But so already I felt like I was trying to contain lightning in a jar to kind of make this book fit into around 100,000 words. Mm-hmm. And then I found the whole thing. I found those journals from Warsaw's public librarians, and I knew that had to really be center stage. And so, because I already had the secret book club and everything else, but once I found those manuscripts, or not the manuscripts, but the journals, I thought, oh no, this really needs to be the focus of the story. But to put it into a story that was already spilling over the edges, it really was just impossible. And I kept trying to force, a square peg into that round hole, and it wasn't working. And so I realized I have to start over. And I reached out to Eliza Knight, is a really good friend of mine. I reached out to her and I was like, I have to start over. And this book is due in like 3 weeks. And I was like,
sorry, I shouldn't laugh at you, but oh my God.
I was like, I think I can still do it. And she was like, oh, honey.
Right?
We need an extension. So she was right. I did actually need an extension. And I had reached out to my editor and I said, I uncovered this incredible research. It's really going to revolutionize this plot. I need another month. And, but I hope it's going to be worth it. And so they gave me the extra month. And at the end, I'm incredibly happy with how the book came out. In fact, I know people always ask, like, what's our favorite book? And it's always the last book that you wrote.
Yeah.
But I really genuinely think this book is a book that I am so incredibly proud of. There is just so much that I put into this book. There's so much research that I put into it. There's so much personal reflection and everything else that I've put into this book that I am so immensely proud of it. And turning the book in one month late actually ended up being very serendipitous, because the book was originally supposed to release on the 4th of July, which I'm sure they would have changed because we all know that's like not the best release date ever. And so they ended up changing it to August 1st. And August 1st, for those of you who do know Polish history, is when the Warsaw Uprising began. And that's when, after 5 years of this oppression and this persecution and all this the Nazi occupation there, when the Poles finally were able to rise up against them. And so at 5 p.m., which was W hour, that's when the Warsaw Uprising actually began. So to this day in Warsaw at 5 p.m. on August 1st, the entire city goes completely silent and all these alarms and sirens blare in honor of the men and women who fought back against the Nazis in that Warsaw uprising. So having my book release on August 1st, it was really just, it was so humbling and it was such a wonderful honor for me.
Yeah.
So it really ended up working out very well. And I got the book done, obviously.
Yeah. So about your research, and not just about Poland, but you did have a book club within the book, and it was called, for a long time, it was the Anti-Hitler Book Club, and that's a really horrible name. Like, that was always afterward, and then they changed it to the Bandit Book Club. But they read several books that are being banned by the Nazis, and it feels as if you chose each one very deliberately. So we're wondering, like, A, have you read all of the books that you chose? And do they hold significant meaning to you?
So yes, the Bandit Book Club, and yeah, the Anti-Hitler Book Club. I actually, because initially I was like, what would they call this? And then I tried to kind of make a joke of it because it really is such a horrible name. But that was honestly such a labor of love. So I came up with the idea because I thought, okay, well, Zofia is this girl who is very, she is very feisty. She's very rebellious. And now Hitler's knocking on the door of Poland. And she's a reader because I love to write readers, as you guys know. And, I was thinking, well, what would a rebellious teenager who's a reader do? And I thought she would want to read the books that Hitler doesn't want people to read. And really, is there any better way to read than with your friends? So
Right.
That's sort of where the idea for the Anti-Hitler Book Club really comes from. So I was like, oh, this is going to be a really great idea, not realizing exactly how much work I had carved out for myself. So first of all, yes, they did have to be books that were banned by Hitler. That was the easiest part because there were so many books that were banned by Hitler that he actually, ironically, published books that he sent out to all the occupied places that had the list of all of the books and authors that should be removed from shelves and destroyed. So they had to be banned by Hitler. They had to have been translated into Polish. And I had to have read them. So there was a lot of reading. Thankfully, Audible helped me with a lot of it. But I have to say, I thought that War and Peace was long. And then I read Les Miserables by Victor Hugo.
That's very long.
How is like everybody always talks about War and Peace as like the pinnacle of like the longest book ever. But no, Les Miserables is actually longer than War and Peace is. But oh my gosh, I had never read, I'd seen the play, I had watched the movie, I had never actually read the book. And wow, what a powerful and beautiful book that was. I feel like I could probably do a whole book chat about just that book. But if anybody has 3 weeks of time on their hands, I definitely recommend that you read Les Miserables by Victor Hugo or listen to it. I think it was like 35 hours or something. But it was so, so, so good. So anyways, yes, I wanted to read all of them because I wanted to feel them the way the characters would feel them.
Yep.
And most importantly, and this was the most difficult part, I wanted each one of those books to really unveil for the characters a new perspective that would not have otherwise been open to them. And so as they're reading these books, there's a progression of growth with all of these characters that coincide with the titles that have been selected, where it might be seeing somebody else in a different light or understanding from someone else's perspective. And that was really crucial to the story. And it was a labor of love. Work.
Points for reading War and Peace. So
Thank you. It was really good also. I really enjoyed that
Yeah.
also. After I got past the very beginning scene where it was like all of like, it's like when I first started listening, it was like all these like dinner parties and chit chats and everything. I was like, I didn't know this is what War and Peace was about. And then it gets on to the war and you're like, okay, now I'm here.
Right.
it's just the Russian names, and it's just
Yeah.
the nicknames of the Russian names, and
Right. Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting with War and Peace. So, and two of those books that I had actually chosen were books that repeatedly came up in my research, and that's War and Peace and Gone with the Wind. And War and Peace was really huge because it gave them hope to know how you had, they were going up against Napoleon's army, and really it was ultimately Russia that ended up defeating them, which for them, the Soviets, it was kind of the devil you know versus the devil you don't. Well, I guess they knew exactly how the Nazi occupation was. It was very violent. And with the Russian occupation, it was nowhere near as bad as that. And so their hope was that Russia would eventually come in and help Poland because they knew they couldn't do it on their own. And with getting rid of Napoleon, it probably felt as impossible at some point as getting rid of Hitler. So it really gave them hope. And then with Gone with the Wind, you know, I feel like that one is so hard because I feel very conflicted about the story of Gone with the Wind. You know, with like that perspective of slavery, about like how they're like happy to be serving them, and it's a very conflicted view. However, I feel like you really can't talk about books and reading during that time period in history without talking about Gone with the Wind. That would be like talking about the publishing world today and not mentioning Colleen Hoover. You know, I mean, it's just it's such a ubiquitous part of the publishing world back then, and everybody was swept away by that story. So those were two books that I knew that I definitely had to incorporate.
Well, and I can actually see people getting caught up in that because it's also a love story about the land.
Yes, absolutely.
It meant a lot to a lot of people, like especially in Poland and stuff. It's a love story about tradition and all that.
Yeah, and
there is a pretty tradition attached to it, but she's doing it because the lesson is the land is everything.
Yes, absolutely.
So. Yeah, and I mean, you did balance it out with some shorter reads like Brave New World. A little bit shorter.
I did that for myself too.
Metamorphosis, which is, really short.
All right. So we do want to wind up with some sort of lightning round, a trio of questions for you. So number one, describe the typical Madeline Martin writing day.
Chaotic. I have kids. So really, I start writing really early in the morning, and then life happens, and I just try to fit in writing wherever I can, depending on who needs to be driven where.
Okay, fair enough. You don't like shove them out the door and say, see you in 7 hours?
No.
All right.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Okay, fair enough. I gotta say, Barb and I are at the stage now where it's mostly just husbands interrupting, but we don't have kids the same, so it is different.
Yeah, but, a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, so it is very much still. I'm in the thick.
I made the joke off air that my son usually calls around this time, and I put the phone on silent to ignore him. He's 30. He can handle me ignoring him. I just wanted to point that out.
I think too that sometimes when you're busier like that, you're actually more productive because you have to squeeze things in.
Right.
So I'm probably not as productive as I could be if I were more pressed for time.
That makes sense.
It's a weird, ironic kind of thing. Okay, number two, if you had one tip to share with an aspiring writer, what would it be?
To never stop learning. I feel like it's really hard to make time for education, but there's no one person that's ever going to know everything about writing. And there are always going to be things that are changing in the world. So I think that I know with myself, I try to do one major thing every single year that I do from an educational standpoint, whether it's taking a class, working with a coach one-on-one, doing an immersion, or something along those lines. And I think it's so incredibly important for people to learn as much as they can, as often as they're able to.
An excellent piece. Good advice.
Thank you.
I should take a class next year. Now you've inspired me. All right, last question. What non-research book are you reading right now?
I'm glad you specified that, Barb.
Let me think. So I'm thinking because I have been doing a lot of research, but I can't talk about my new book that I'm working on right now. So I am currently reading Sisters of Fortune by Annalee Huber, and it's an arc for a book that's going to be coming out next year, and it's about the Titanic, which is
I know I have Kindle. I have the arc for that.
Yes, I'm actually just finishing it up right now, and it's been very, very good. Which is actually funny because it's about the Titanic, and I'm actually leaving for a cruise tomorrow.
My next book that I'm writing is Titanic set. So as soon as I saw the arc, I was like, I'm getting that.
Heck yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think the Titanic is just something that's really fascinated me for a long time. So I've really enjoyed it.
there's a lot of stories to be mined there. So
Oh, absolutely.
So
100%.
many.
I
so
saw
many.
that on NetGalley. That might be one that I actually spend money on, but
It's really good.
I divide it between what I buy and what I don't.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was so nice to have you back.
Oh, thank you. It was
Oh,
great
you're
chatting
having
with you
me.
ladies again. I appreciate you having me.
We
And
love
our-
the book.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Our viewers can visit you at your website at madelinemartin.com. And the name of the book is The Keeper of Hidden Books.
Correct.
I'll bring the cover back up again just so everyone can have a good little gander at it.
Mhm.
Definitely worth your time and money.
Thank you. I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, I read it in pretty much 2 sittings.
Oh,
I
wow.
agree. It was a devouring kind of book. And my friend Carol, who is not a writer, but she was one of the people on the 75 people waiting. She loved it.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. Mhm.
So, Barb, what have we got coming up?
Next Tuesday is our monthly writing room where we're going to discuss how to show and not tell, which
Ooh.
we've been referencing now since January. So we're actually
The
going to
very
do it.
first one.
And we want to remind people, if they like the show, to subscribe on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com at Step Into the Story Books. And they should also join our Facebook community, facebook.com/group/Step Into the Story. And if you have any questions for Madeline, please put them under the stream, and we will get them to her when she comes back from her cruise. And we will get some answers for you. And in the meantime, read her book.
That's it.
That's it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.